The digital clock on the knitstand glowed 11:47 p.m. when 3-year-old Emma Martinez pressed herself deeper into the corner of her bedroom closet. Her tiny fingers clutched her stuffed elephant, Mr. Peanuts, so tightly that her knuckles had turned white in the darkness. The shouting from the living room had started again, louder this time, more violent than usual. Her mother's voice cracked with desperation, while her father's boomed with rage fueled by alcohol and frustration. "You're nothing but a worthless junkie." His voice thundered through the thin walls of their cramped apartment in East Denver. "Look at this place. Look at what you've done to our family." Emma squeezed her eyes shut and hummed the lullaby her grandmother Rosa used to sing when she visited. The melody barely escaped her lips, a whispered tune that usually made her feel safe. But tonight, even Grandma's song couldn't drown out the terrifying sounds echoing through their home. The apartment they shared had once felt cozy, with Emma's colorful drawings taped to the refrigerator and her toys scattered across the worn carpet. Now it felt like a prison where monsters lived. A crash shattered the night-something glass, hitting the wall, probably one of Mama's ceramic figurines that she treasured. Emma flinched and buried her face against Mr. Peanut's soft gray fabric. The elephant had been a gift from Rosa for Emma's second birthday, and it smelled like her grandmother's lavender perfume and warm hugs. In this moment of terror, it was her only anchor to safety and love. "Please stop." Her mother's voice broke through the chaos, smaller now, defeated. "Emma's sleeping. You'll wake her up." But Emma wasn't sleeping. She hadn't really slept peacefully in weeks. The fighting had become a nightly ritual, and even during the day, the apartment felt heavy with unspoken tension. Her father had lost his construction job 3 months ago, and her mother's struggles with prescription medication had spiraled into something darker and more frightening. Emma didn't understand the adult words they used or the reasons behind their anger, but she felt the fear that seemed to live in the walls now. Another crash, this one closer to her room. Emma's little heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had learned to hide in this closet during the worst fights, surrounded by her few clothes and toys, creating a fortress against the chaos beyond the door. Sometimes she pretended she was camping with Mr. Peanuts, or hiding in a magical cave where dragons couldn't find her. But tonight, the pretending wasn't working. The sound of heavy footsteps approached her door. Emma held her breath, making herself as small as possible behind her winter coats. The footsteps paused, and she heard the doorknob turn slowly. Yellow light from the hallway sliced through the darkness of her room, and she could see her father's silhouette filling the doorframe. "Where is she?" He slurred, his voice thick with alcohol. "Emma, come here right now." Emma pressed her hand over her mouth to keep from making any sound. Mr. Peanuts seemed to understand, remaining perfectly still in her arms. Her father stomped into the room, throwing open dresser drawers and looking under the bed with increasing agitation. "I know you're in here, you little brat. Come out and see what your mother has done now." From the living room, she could hear her mother crying, a sound that cut through Emma's heart like broken glass. Mama's sobs were different tonight, not angry tears, but the kind that came from somewhere deep and hopeless. Emma wanted to run to her, to hug her and make everything better, but her feet felt frozen to the closet floor. Her father's heavy breathing was right outside the closet door now. Emma could smell the sharp scent of beer and cigarettes that always surrounded him when he was like this. Her tiny body trembled as she waited, certain he would find her hiding. Spot. The seconds stretched like hours until finally, his footsteps moved away from the closet. "Fine, hide then, but this isn't over." The bedroom door slammed shut, leaving Emma alone in the darkness once again. The fighting continued for another hour, voices rising and falling like a violent storm. Emma lost track of time, drifting in and out of an exhausted half-sleep while still clutching Mr. Peanuts. In her dreams, she was back in Rose's kitchen, helping make empanadas, while Spanish music played softly from the old radio. Her grandmother's gentle hands guided hers as they folded the dough, and Rosa sang along in her beautiful voice that made everything feel safe and warm. The dream shattered when sirens began wailing outside the apartment building. Red and blue. Lights flashed through her bedroom window, painting crazy patterns on the walls. Emma had seen police cars before, but never here, never coming for her family. The sirens grew louder, closer, until they stopped right outside. Heavy knocking thundered. On the front door. "Police, open up." The apartment fell silent, except for her mother's muffled crying. Emma heard unfamiliar voices, official and authoritative, filling the space where her parents' arguments had been. She remained in the closet, too frightened to move, even when she heard gentle footsteps entering her room. "Hello? Is anyone in here?" The voice was different from her father's, calm, patient, kind. "We're here to help." A flashlight beam swept across the room, and Emma knew they would find her soon. When the closet door opened gently, revealing Officer Jake Thompson's concerned face, Emma looked up at him with eyes that had seen too much for someone so young. She didn't speak, didn't cry, didn't move. She simply stared at this stranger who had come into her nightmare. "It's okay, sweetheart," Officer Thompson whispered, extending his hand slowly. "You're safe now." But Emma didn't believe in safety anymore. At 3 years old, she had learned that the world could be terrifying and unpredictable, that the people who were supposed to protect her could become the source of her deepest fears. As Officer Thompson gently lifted her from the closet, still clutching Mr. Peanuts, Emma made a decision that her young mind didn't fully understand. She decided to stop talking to a world that had become too scary to trust. Officer Jake Thompson sat in his patrol car outside the Denver Police Department headquarters, staring at the official memo in disbelief. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot, but Jake felt like storm clouds were gathering over his career. Rex, his German Shepherd partner of 5 years, sat alertly in the back seat, sensing his handler's agitation through the reinforced barrier that separated them. "Therapy Dog Program Initiative," Jake read aloud, shaking his head. "Effective immediately, selected K-9 units will participate in courthouse victim support services." He crumpled the paper and tossed it onto the passenger seat. "What's next, Rex? Are they going to have us reading bedtime stories to criminals?" Rex's ears perked up at the mention of his name, and he let out a soft whine that Jake had learned to interpret as concern. The dog had an uncanny ability to read his handler's moods, a trait that had made them one of the most effective narcotics teams in the department. They'd busted million-dollar drug operations, tracked suspects through the worst neighborhoods in Denver, and earned commendations for their work together. Now some bureaucrat wanted to turn them into glorified teddy bears. Jake's phone buzzed with a text from his partner, Officer Maria Santos. "Heard about your new assignment. Maybe you'll finally learn some people skills." He grimaced and shoved the phone back into his pocket. Maria had been trying to get him to soften up for years, claiming his all-business attitude made him intimidating to victims and witnesses. She didn't understand that maintaining professional distance was how he survived this job. The truth was, Jake had built walls around himself for good reason. 8 years on the force had shown him humanity's darkest side: domestic violence, child abuse, drug addiction destroying families, and senseless violence that left communities shattered. He'd learned early that caring too much would break him, so he focused on facts, evidence, and procedure. Rex was different, though. With Rex, Jake could let his guard down. The dog didn't judge, didn't ask probing questions about why Jake lived. Alone in a studio apartment with nothing but police awards on the walls, Captain Rodriguez's voice boomed across the parking lot. "Thompson, my office now." Jake clipped Rex's leash and walked into the building, dreading this conversation. Captain Rodriguez was a good man, but he had a tendency to volunteer his officers for community outreach programs that Jake found pointless and time-consuming. The captain's office smelled like coffee and stress, with case files stacked on every available surface and a police scanner crackling quietly in the corner. "Sit down, Thompson," Captain Rodriguez said, not looking up from his computer screen. "I know what you're thinking about this new assignment. With all due respect, sir, Rex and I are narcotics specialists. We've got the highest success rate in the department. Why waste our skills on—" Jake struggled to find diplomatic words. "On helping traumatized children?" The captain's voice carried a sharp edge. "Let me tell you something, Thompson. 3 weeks ago, you and Rex found that little girl, Emma Martinez, hiding in a closet. You remember her?" Jake's jaw tightened. How could he forget? Those terrified brown eyes still haunted his dreams. The way she'd looked at him, not with relief, but with the kind of fear that comes from learning the world isn't safe. He'd carried her out of that apartment, feeling her tiny body trembling against his chest, and something inside his carefully constructed walls had cracked. "I remember," he said quietly. "Well, she hasn't spoken a single word since that night. Not one word in 6 months, Thompson. Her grandmother brings her to the courthouse for custody hearings, and this kid just sits there like a statue. The child psychologist says she's got severe trauma-induced selective mutism." Captain Rodriguez finally looked up, his weathered face showing the strain of too many years dealing with broken families. "The brass thinks maybe Rex could help kids like Emma feel safer in court." Jake shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Sir, Rex is trained for drug detection, suspect apprehension, and crowd control. He's not some therapy animal. Have you ever watched him around kids?" The captain pulled out his phone and scrolled through photos. "Remember the elementary school safety presentation last month?" He turned the screen toward Jake, showing a picture of Rex surrounded by laughing children, his tail wagging his tiny hands petted his fur. "Look at his face in that photo. Tell me he doesn't love those kids." Jake studied the image and felt his chest tighten. Rex did look happy in a way that was different from his usual professional alertness. The dog's eyes were soft, his mouth open in what looked suspiciously like a smile. But still, this is a pilot program, Thompson. 6 months. If it doesn't work, you go back to narcotics full time. But if it does work, the captain leaned back in his chair. You might discover that there's more than one way to serve and protect. As Jake left the captain's office, his mind raced with doubts and frustrations. He joined the police force to catch bad guys, not to provide emotional support to victims. That was what social workers and therapists were for. He loaded Rex into the patrol car and drove to the training facility, hoping that the physical activity might clear his head. At the canine training grounds, Rex bounded through obstacle courses with his usual enthusiasm and precision. Other handlers were working with their dogs, and Jake found himself watching how the animals interacted not just with their partners, but with everyone around them. Sergeant Lisa Chun's Belgian Malinois Apollo had the same tough guy reputation as Rex, but Jake noticed how the dog's entire demeanor changed when Chun's 8-year-old daughter visited the facility. Apollo became gentle, playful, almost protective. "Second thoughts about the therapy program?" Sergeant Chun asked, joining Jake near the fence. "How did you know?" "Because I had the same look when they asked Apollo and me to work with veterans suffering from PTSD. She watched her dog demonstrate a complex search pattern. I thought it was touchy-feely nonsense. Turns out, helping people heal is harder than catching criminals, but it's also more rewarding." Jake remained skeptical, but something in her words resonated. That night, As he sat in his empty apartment with Rex, stretched out on the floor beside his chair, Jake found himself thinking about Emma Martinez again. Her case file sat on his kitchen table. He'd requested a copy after learning about his new assignment. She'd be back in court next week for another custody hearing. Rex lifted his head and looked at Jake with those intelligent brown eyes that seemed to see everything. "What do you think, boy?" Jake asked quietly. "Think we can help a scared little girl find her voice again?" Rex's tail thumped once against the floor, and for the first time since receiving his new assignment, Jake Thompson allowed himself to consider that maybe, just maybe, there might be more ways to make a difference than he'd ever imagined. Judge Patricia Williams sat in her chambers at 5:30 a.m., long before the courthouse officially opened, nursing her third cup of coffee, while Emma Martinez's case file lay spread across her mahogany desk like pieces of a broken puzzle. 23 years on the bench had taught her that the early morning hours, before the chaos of court proceedings began, were the only time she could truly think clearly about the most difficult cases. And Emma's case was breaking her heart. The security footage from the apartment building played silently on her laptop screen. Grainy black and white images of police officers carrying a tiny figure wrapped in a blanket. Emma had been so small. That night 6 months ago, so fragile, that Judge Williams had to remind herself this wasn't just another file number in the system. This was a real child whose entire future hung in the balance of decisions she would make today. Patricia removed her reading glasses and rubbed her tired eyes. At 58, she'd seen thousands of custody cases, each one a family torn apart by circumstances that ranged from tragic to horrific. She'd learned to maintain professional detachment, to focus on legal precedents and child welfare statutes rather than the emotional wreckage scattered through her courtroom daily. But Emma's silence haunted her in a way that few cases ever had. The psychological evaluation report made for grim reading. Dr. Sarah Chun, one of Denver's most respected child trauma specialists, had documented Emma's complete withdrawal from verbal communication. Subject exhibits classic symptoms of trauma-induced selective mutism, the report stated clinically. Multiple therapeutic interventions have yielded no progress. Patient appears to have constructed psychological barriers as protective mechanisms following exposure to domestic violence. Judge Williams had requested additional evaluations from 2 other specialists, hoping for different conclusions. Both reports echoed Dr. Chun's findings. Emma Martinez, at 3 years old, had decided the world was too dangerous to trust with her voice. The implications were staggering. Children who remained mute for extended periods often struggled with communication and social development for years, sometimes permanently. The case had 3 possible outcomes, none of them perfect. Emma's mother, Carmen Martinez, was completing a court-ordered rehabilitation program for prescription drug addiction. Her letters from the facility were heartbreaking, a woman desperate to reclaim her daughter and her life, promising to be the mother Emma deserved. But Carmen had already violated 2 previous treatment agreements, and her history suggested a pattern of relapse that put Emma at risk. Emma's father, Diego Martinez, sat in county jail awaiting trial for domestic assault and drug possession charges. His public defender had submitted a motion for supervised visitation rights, arguing that paternal bonds were crucial for Emma's development. Judge Williams had reviewed Diego's criminal history, 3 previous domestic violence arrests, 2 DUI convictions, and a restraining order violation. The man was a walking red flag, yet legally, he still had parental rights that couldn't be terminated without a lengthy process. The third option was permanent custody to Emma's grandmother, Rosa Martinez. At 62, Rosa worked double shifts at a nursing home, cleaned office buildings on weekends to support herself and Emma. Her home study report was exemplary, Small but spotless apartment filled with Emma's artwork and toys, evidence of a grandmother's love trying to heal. A broken child. But Rose's age and financial struggles raised legitimate concerns about her ability to provide long-term stability. Judge Williams walked to the window overlooking downtown Denver, watching the city wake up in the dawn light. Somewhere out there, Emma was probably having breakfast with Rosa, still silent, still trapped in her protective shell. The child had missed critical developmental milestones during these 6 months of silence. Speech therapy, play therapy, even art therapy had failed to reach her. The longer she remained mute, the harder it would become to break through those psychological walls she'd built. The intercom on her desk buzzed. "Judge Williams, your 9 a.m. appointment is here early." Patricia checked her schedule. Maria Santos from Child Protective Services was here to discuss Emma's case before the hearing. "Send her in." Maria entered carrying a thick folder and wearing the expression of someone who'd spent too many sleepless nights worrying about the children in her caseload. At 35, she'd been a social worker for 12 years, and Emma's case had become personal for her too. "How's she doing?" Judge Williams asked, pouring Maria a cup of coffee from the pot she kept constantly brewing. "Physically, she's thriving with Rosa. Eating well, sleeping through the night, no behavioral problems. But the silence, ... Maria sat down heavily in the leather chair across from the judge's desk. "It's been 6 months, Your Honor. Dr. Chun is concerned that if we don't see some breakthrough soon, this could become permanent." Judge Williams felt a familiar weight settle in her chest. "What's your recommendation for today's hearing?" "Rosa wants permanent custody. She's prepared to quit one of her jobs to spend more time with Emma, even though it'll mean financial hardship. Carmen's counselor says she's making genuine progress in rehab, but she's got 60 days left in the program, and then she'll need transitional housing and employment." Diego ... double quotes. Maria shook her head. "Diego's attorney is pushing for visitation rights, claiming paternal connection might help Emma speak again." "And you think?" "I think Diego Martinez is the reason Emma stopped talking in the first place. The night Officer Thompson found her, she was hiding from her father, not seeking comfort from him." Judge Williams nodded, remembering Officer Thompson's report. He described finding Emma pressed into the corner of her closet, trembling and mute with terror. The image had stayed with her for months. "There's something else," Maria continued. "I heard about the new therapy dog program starting today. Officer Thompson and his dog Rex are supposed to provide support during difficult hearings. Given Emma's response to the officer that night, she at least looked at him, which is more than she does with most adults. Maybe having the dog present might help her feel more comfortable." Judge Williams considered this. She'd been skeptical when the courthouse administration announced the pilot program, viewing it as another well-intentioned but impractical initiative. But if there was even a small chance that Rex could help Emma feel safer in the intimidating environment of her courtroom, wasn't it worth trying? "Schedule Rex and Officer Thompson for this afternoon's session," she decided. "And Maria, I want you to prepare Rosa for the possibility that I might grant temporary custody with a 6-month review. Carmen deserves a chance to prove her sobriety. But Emma's well-being comes first." As Maria left, Judge Williams returned to Emma's file. Somewhere in the legal documents, psychological reports, and procedural motions was a 3-year-old girl who'd lost her voice to fear. Today, Patricia Williams had to decide how to give her the best chance of finding it again. She'd made thousands of custody decisions, but somehow she knew Emma Martinez's case would define the rest of her career. The Denver family courthouse buzzed with its usual morning chaos when Officer Jake Thompson and Rex arrived for their first day of the therapy dog program. Jake's stomach churned with anxiety as he guided Rex through the metal detectors, past suspicious looks from veteran bailiffs who who couldn't understand why a K-9 unit was entering their domain without pursuing a suspect. Rex, sensing his handler's nervousness, stayed unusually close to Jake's left leg, his ears alert and eyes scanning the unfamiliar environment. "You must be Officer Thompson." A woman in her early 40s approached with a warm smile and an outstretched hand. Dr. Sarah Chun wore a soft blue cardigan that somehow managed to look both professional and approachable. "I'm the court-appointed child psychologist. I've been looking forward to meeting you and Rex." Jake shook her hand, noting how Rex immediately relaxed at Dr. Chun's calm energy. "To be honest, ma'am, I'm not sure what we're supposed to do here. Rex and I are used to chasing down drug dealers, not—" He gestured vaguely at the families scattered throughout the waiting area. "Not helping traumatized children heal?" Dr. Chun's eyes twinkled with understanding. "I felt the same way when I first started working with kids. I thought my psychology degree and clinical training were all I needed. Turns out, sometimes the best therapy comes from the most unexpected sources." The courthouse lobby presented a stark contrast to the police precincts Jake knew. Instead of hardened criminals and fellow officers, families clustered on uncomfortable benches, speaking in hushed, worried tones. Children clung to parents or grandparents, some crying softly. Others sitting with the thousand-yard stare that Jake recognized from his own experiences with trauma victims. The air was thick with anxiety, legal paperwork, and the institutional smell of cleaning products and fear. Rex's nose twitched as he processed the complex cocktail of human emotions surrounding them. Jake had always been amazed by his partner's ability to read situations through scent and body language that humans missed entirely. The dog's tail, usually held high with confidence, lowered slightly not in submission, but in what Jake was learning to recognize as empathy. "There's someone I'd like you to meet," Dr. Chun said, leading them toward a corner where a heavyset woman in scrubs sat next to a small figure hunched over a coloring book. "Rosa Martinez. This is Officer Thompson and Rex." Rosa looked up with tired eyes that brightened slightly at the sight of the German Shepherd. She spoke with a gentle accent, her voice carrying the weight of months of worry. "Officer Thompson, you're the one who found my Emma that terrible night. I never got to thank you properly." Jake shifted uncomfortably, memories of that night flooding back. "Just doing my job, ma'am." Beside Rosa, Emma sat completely still, her small hand gripping a broken crayon as she stared at a coloring page of butterflies. She hadn't acknowledged their approach, or even looked up from her work. The silence around her felt almost tangible, like a protective bubble that kept the world at a distance. Rex, however, had different ideas about respecting personal space. A dog took a step toward Emma, then another, his movements so slow and deliberate that it seemed almost choreographed. Jake started to call him back, but Dr. Chun placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Let him work," she whispered. Rex settled onto the floor about 3 feet from Emma's chair, close enough to be present, but far enough away to avoid seeming threatening. He laid his massive head on his paws and simply watched her, his brown eyes patient and kind. For several minutes, nothing happened. Emma continued coloring, seemingly oblivious to the 85-pound German Shepherd studying her every move. Then, almost imperceptibly, Emma's coloring slowed. Her grip on the crayon loosened. Without lifting her head, her eyes shifted slightly to the left, just enough to catch sight of Rex in her peripheral vision. It was the first time in months that Rosa had seen her granddaughter acknowledge another living being. "Dios mío, Rosa," whispered, tears starting to form in her eyes. Other families in the waiting area began to notice Rex's presence. A 5-year-old boy who had been crying inconsolably suddenly stopped mid-sob, his attention captured by the dog. Twin girls, probably around 7, pointed and whispered excitedly to their mother. Even the adults seemed to relax slightly, their conversations becoming less hushed and fearful. Jake watched in amazement as Rex worked his magic without moving. From his position on the floor, the dog's presence was transforming the atmosphere of the waiting area in ways Jake had never imagined possible. Children who had been withdrawn were becoming curious. Parents who had been tense were starting to breathe easier. It was like watching a masterclass in emotional support that no police academy had ever taught him. "Can I pet him?" asked a young boy with a cast on his arm, approaching cautiously with his mother close behind. Jake looked to Dr. Chun, who nodded encouragingly. "Rex is very gentle," Jake said, kneeling to the boy's eye level. "But let's ask him permission first. Hold out your hand like this and let him sniff it." Rex's tail began a slow, gentle wag as he sniffed the boy's small hand. Then, with the careful precision he usually reserved for evidence searches, Rex nuzzled the child's palm with his wet nose. The boy giggled, the first happy sound they'd heard in the courthouse that morning. Within minutes, Rex had become the unofficial greeter of the family court waiting area. Children approached with varying degrees of courage, while their parents watched anxiously. Some wanted to pet him, others were content to simply sit nearby and watch his calm breathing. Rex seemed to instinctively know what each child needed: playful energy for some, quiet companionship for others. Emma remained focused on her coloring, but Jake noticed she was now using her peripheral vision to watch the interactions happening around Rex. When a particularly young child, probably only 2 years old, toddled over and grabbed a handful of Rex's fur, Emma actually turned her head slightly to see what would happen. Rex, demonstrating the patience of a saint, simply lifted his head and gave the toddler a gentle lick that sent the child into delighted squeals. Dr. Chun moved closer to Jake, speaking quietly. "In all my years of working with traumatized children, I've never seen anything quite like this. Rex isn't just comforting these kids, he's creating a safe space where they can begin to trust again." Jake felt something shifting in his chest, a warmth he hadn't experienced since joining the force. Maybe Captain Rodriguez had been right. Maybe there was more than one way to serve and protect. As he watched his partner work with these vulnerable children, Jake realized that Rex had always had this gift. He just never had the opportunity to use it. When the bailiff announced that court would soon be in session, Jake noticed Emma glance directly at Rex for just a moment before returning to her coloring. It lasted less than a second, but in that brief eye contact, Jake saw something that made his pulse quicken. For the first time in 6 months, Emma Martinez had looked at the world around her with something other than fear. It was curiosity, small, tentative, but undeniably real. And it was directed at his partner. "Ready for the real test?" Dr. Chun asked as they prepared to enter the courtroom. Jake looked down at Rex, who seemed to understand that their most important work was just beginning. "We're ready." Judge Patricia Williams entered courtroom 3B precisely at 2 p.m., her black robes rustling as she took her position behind the imposing oak bench. The afternoon light filtered through tall windows, casting geometric shadows across the polished marble floors where countless family dramas had played out over the years. Today felt different, though charged with an anticipation that made even the bailiff, veteran Tom Rodriguez, shift nervously at his post. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Williams," Tom announced, his voice echoing off the high ceilings, decorated with carved symbols of justice and law. Emma Martinez sat between her grandmother Rosa and court-appointed advocate Jennifer Walsh in the front row of the gallery. At 3 years old, she barely filled half of the adult-sized seat, her tiny legs dangling several inches from the floor. She clutched Mr. Peanuts, her stuffed elephant, with both hands, the toy showing signs of 6 months of constant companionship. Faded gray fabric, a loose ear, and a small hole where stuffing peeked through. Rosa wore her best dress, a navy blue one she'd purchased years ago for church, but now reserved for court appearances. Her weathered hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her granddaughter's dark hair, whispering a prayer in Spanish under her breath. 6 months of legal proceedings had aged her considerably, but her love for Emma remained the one constant in a world that had become bewilderingly complex. On the opposite side of the courtroom sat Carmen Martinez, Emma's mother, flanked by her public defender and a counselor from the rehabilitation facility. Carmen had lost 20 pounds during her treatment program, her face gaunt, but her eyes clearer than they'd been in years. She kept glancing at her daughter, desperate for any sign of recognition or connection. Each time Emma failed to look her way, Carmen's shoulders sagged a little more. Diego Martinez appeared via video conference. From county jail, his image pixelated on a large monitor that dominated one corner of the courtroom. Even through the poor video quality, his agitation was obvious as he shifted in his orange jumpsuit, whispering urgently to his attorney during technical difficulties with the audio feed. Judge Williams had presided over thousands of custody hearings, but Emma's case had haunted her dreams for weeks. The child's complete silence had become a symbol of everything broken in the family court system. How trauma could steal not just safety and stability from children, but their very voices. As she reviewed the case files one final time, Patricia made a decision that would either be remembered as innovative or criticized as unprofessional. Before we begin today's proceedings, Judge Williams announced, her voice carrying the authority of 2 decades on the bench, I'm implementing a new therapeutic support protocol approved by the court administration. She nodded toward the back of the courtroom. Officer Thompson, please bring Rex forward. A ripple of murmurs swept through the gallery as Jake Thompson and Rex entered through the main doors. Several attorneys exchanged puzzled glances, clearly unprepared for this development. Rex moved with his usual confident stride, but Jake noticed. The dog's posture shifted subtly as they approached the formal space of the courtroom. Less police dog, more gentle companion. Your Honor, Diego's attorney interjected through the video feed. I object to this irregular procedure. My client has a right to standard, Mr. Peterson. Judge Williams cut him off firmly. Your client is participating via video conference from jail. I think we can manage one therapy dog in my courtroom without compromising anyone's rights. Emma had been staring at her lap throughout the exchange, but the soft click of Rex's nails on the marble floor made her head lift almost imperceptibly. Her dark eyes, so often described as vacant in psychological reports, showed a flicker of something not quite interest, but awareness. Rex seemed to sense the gravity of the moment as Jake guided him to a position near the witness stand, close enough to the gallery to be visible to Emma, but far enough from the proceedings to avoid disruption. The German shepherd settled into his calm, observant position, his intelligent brown eyes scanning the room with the same attention he'd once reserved for detecting narcotics. The court recognizes that these proceedings directly impact the welfare of a child who has experienced significant trauma, Judge Williams explained to the assembled parties. Rex is here as an emotional support presence, nothing more. Now let's proceed with today's custody review. Dr. Sarah Chun was called to testify first. Her clinical assessment of Emma's condition, providing the foundation for all decisions to follow. Emma continues to exhibit selective mutism consistent with severe trauma response. She reported in professional tones that couldn't mask her obvious concern for her young patient. Despite intensive therapy interventions, she has not spoken a single word in 6 months. The longer this silence persists, the more difficult remediation becomes. Rosa testified next, her accented English becoming thicker as emotion overwhelmed. Her careful preparation. She is good girl, Minita. She eat good, she sleep good with me. But she no talk, no laugh, no sing like before. Sometimes I catch her looking at me like she want to say something, But then, Rose's voice broke. Then she'd just go back to her elephant. During Rose's testimony, something remarkable began happening. Emma, who typically remained rigid and unresponsive during court proceedings, started showing subtle signs of engagement. Her grip on Mr. Peanuts loosened slightly. Her posture straightened. Most significantly, her eyes began tracking between the speakers and Rex, as if she was following the conversation for the first time in months. Jake noticed the change too. Rex's ears were perked forward, not in alert mode, but in the gentle attention he'd shown to distressed children in the courthouse waiting area. The dog's breathing had slowed to an almost meditative rhythm, creating a pocket of calm in the otherwise tense atmosphere. Carmen's testimony via phone was heartbreaking. Her voice cracked as she described her progress in rehabilitation, her desperate desire to be the mother Emma deserved. "I know I made terrible mistakes," she said, tears streaming down her face on the monitor. "But I'm getting better. I'm clean now, really clean. Please don't give up on me. Don't give up on us." Emma showed no reaction to her mother's pleas. But Judge Williams noticed that the child was no longer staring at her lap. Instead, she was watching Rex with increasing fascination, as if trying to solve a puzzle only she could see. The courtroom had grown quieter than usual, with even the attorneys speaking in subdued tones. Rex's presence had created an almost sacred atmosphere where the usual adversarial dynamics seemed inappropriate. It was as if everyone present understood they were witnessing something unprecedented, not just a custody hearing, but a 3-year-old's first tentative steps back toward trusting the world around her. As the afternoon wore on and testimony concluded, Judge Williams prepared to make her ruling. But first, she found herself doing something she'd never done in 23 years on the bench. She spoke directly to the child whose future hung in the balance. "Emma," Judge Williams said gently, her formal judicial tone softening to something almost grandmotherly. "I know you've been through some very scary things. But you're safe now, and everyone in this room wants what's best for you." Emma's head turned slightly toward the bench, not quite looking at the judge, but clearly listening. Rex lifted his head at that moment, and for just an instant, child and dog regarded each other across the formal space of the courtroom. In that moment of connection, everyone present held their breath, sensing that something extraordinary was about to happen. The courtroom held its collective breath as Emma Martinez slowly pushed herself up from her chair, her tiny frame seeming impossibly small against the towering backdrop of legal formality. Mr. Peanuts, her constant companion for 6 months of silence, tumbled from her lap and hit the marble floor with a soft thud that echoed like thunder in the hushed chamber. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, the stuffed elephant lay forgotten the first time. Emma had willingly separated herself from her security blanket since that terrible night in the closet. Judge Patricia Williams felt her heart hammering against her ribs as she watched the 3-year-old take her first tentative step toward Rex. 23 years of judicial experience had taught her to maintain professional composure under any circumstances, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the edge of her bench, every instinct telling her to remain silent and let this miracle unfold naturally. Rosa Martinez gasped audibly, her weathered hands flying to cover her mouth as tears immediately began streaming down her cheeks. She'd prayed for this moment every night for 6 months, begging God to return her granddaughter's voice, to heal the wounds that ran deeper than anyone could see. But she'd never dared to hope it might happen. Here, in this intimidating courtroom filled with strangers making decisions about Emma's future, Rex remained perfectly still as Emma approached, his police training and natural intuition combining to create an almost supernatural awareness of the moment's importance. Jake Thompson watched in amazement as his partner demonstrated a level of emotional intelligence he'd never fully appreciated. The German Shepherd's usual alertness had transformed into something gentler, protective, yet non-threatening, powerful, yet nurturing. Carmen Martinez leaned forward on the video monitor, her hands pressed against the glass partition in her rehabilitation facility's communication room. Even through the pixelated video feed, her desperation was palpable as she watched her daughter move with more purpose than she'd shown in half a year. "Me amor," she whispered to the screen, her voice breaking with hope and heartbreak intermingled. Dr. Sarah Chun sat frozen in the witness chair, her clinical training warring with maternal instincts as she watched Emma's breakthrough unfold. She'd worked with hundreds of traumatized children over her 15-year career, but selective mutism cases this severe rarely resolved spontaneously. What she was witnessing defied every textbook and case study she'd ever encountered. Her pen remained poised over her notepad, though she'd stopped taking notes entirely, too mesmerized to document this historic moment. Emma's second step was more confident than her first. Her third carried her within arm's reach of Rex, who had lowered his massive head to her eye level without being commanded. The dog's brown eyes were impossibly gentle, radiating the kind of unconditional acceptance that Emma hadn't experienced since before her world exploded into violence and fear. The court reporter, Sandra Mills, had mechanically transcribed thousands of hearings over her 12-year career, but her fingers hovered motionless over her stenotype machine. She'd never been asked to record a child's first words after months of silence, and something told her that whatever was about to happen would be more significant than any legal precedent or judicial ruling she'd ever documented. Bailiff Tom Rodriguez stood at attention near the courtroom's main doors, but his professional vigilance had been replaced by grandfatherly concern. In his 20 years of courthouse security, he'd seen families torn apart by abuse, addiction, and violence. But he'd rarely witnessed healing happen in real time. His radio crackled softly with routine security checks, but Tom barely heard it over the sound of his own heartbeat. Emma knelt slowly beside Rex, her small hand hovering inches from his fur. The German Shepherd remained motionless, barely breathing, as if he understood that one wrong move could shatter this fragile moment of trust. Emma's face, so often described as vacant or distant in official reports, showed something no one had seen in months, genuine curiosity mixed with cautious hope. Jake Thompson felt tears building behind his eyes, though he fought to maintain his professional composure. He'd carried this little girl out of hell 6 months ago, her tiny body trembling with terror against his chest. Now she was choosing to trust again, and somehow, impossibly, it was his partner who had unlocked that trust. Every doubt he'd harbored about the therapy dog program evaporated as he witnessed Rex's gift for healing traumatized souls. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the courtroom windows seemed to intensify, creating an almost ethereal glow around Emma and Rex. Even the usually harsh fluorescent lights above appeared softer, as if the universe itself was holding its breath for this moment of resurrection, not just of a child's voice, but of her faith in the world's capacity for gentleness. Emma's fingers made contact with Rex's fur, and the German Shepherd's tail moved in the slightest wag, not the enthusiastic greeting he might give to Jake or another familiar person, but a gentle acknowledgement that seemed perfectly calibrated to Emma's fragile emotional state. The sensation of his soft coat beneath her palm was revelation itself, warmth, comfort, and safety in a world that had taught her to expect only danger. For several heartbeats, child and dog remained connected, in perfect stillness. Then Emma leaned forward, bringing her face close to Rex's ear, and in a voice so soft it was barely audible, so precious it seemed to carry the weight of miracles, she spoke her first words in 6 months. "Good boy." The words hung in the air, like crystallized hope, transforming the sterile courtroom into something sacred. Judge Williams felt 23 years of judicial restraint crumble as tears streamed down her face. She'd presided over thousands of cases, handed down countless rulings, but nothing in her distinguished career had moved her like hearing those two simple words, spoken with such pure trust by a child who had forgotten how to believe in goodness. Rosa Martinez sobbed openly, her prayers answered in a way more beautiful than she'd ever imagined. Carmen Martinez pressed her face against the video screen, crying with joy and heartbreak as her daughter's voice reached across miles of separation to touch her soul. Even Diego Martinez, hardened by years of anger and addiction, fell silent on the video feed, perhaps glimpsing for the first time the true cost of his violence. Rex responded to Emma's praise by gently nuzzling her small hand, his movement so careful it seemed choreographed by angels. Emma smiled, the first genuine smile anyone had seen from her since that terrible night, and in that moment, everyone present understood they had witnessed something that would forever change their understanding of healing, hope, and the mysterious ways that love finds us when we need it most. The silence that followed Emma's words was different from the fearful quiet that had preceded it. This was the silence of wonder, of witnesses to a miracle, of a courtroom transformed into a sanctuary where a little girl had found her voice. Again, through the unconditional love of a dog who somehow knew exactly what she needed most. Good boy, Emma repeated, slightly louder this time, her confidence growing with each word as she rediscovered the power of her own voice. The courtroom erupted into a symphony of emotion as Emma's words continued to echo off the marble walls and wooden panels that had witnessed countless human dramas, but never anything quite like this miracle unfolding before their eyes. Judge Patricia Williams abandoned all pretense of judicial composure, her tears flowing freely as she watched the 3-year-old continue to whisper gentle words of praise to Rex, each syllable a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the healing power of unconditional love. "Oh, mi niña preciosa," Rosa Martinez sobbed, her voice breaking with 6 months of accumulated grief, hope, and desperate prayers finally answered. She started to rise from her seat, her maternal instincts overwhelming courtroom protocol, but Advocate Jennifer Walsh gently placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. Jennifer's own eyes were brimming with tears as she whispered, "Let her have this moment with Rex. She's finding her way back to us." A court reporter, Sandra Mills, sat, frozen at her stenotype machine, her professional duty warring with the overwhelming emotion of the moment. How do you transcribe a miracle? How do you capture in cold legal terminology the moment when a child's voice returns from the darkness of trauma? Her fingers trembled over the keys as she attempted to document not just Emma's words, but the transformation occurring before her eyes, the way the little girl's posture had straightened, how color had returned to her previously pale cheeks, the light that now danced in eyes that had been vacant for so long. Dr. Sarachon felt her clinical objectivity completely shatter as she watched her most challenging patient achieve a breakthrough that defied every psychiatric model she'd studied. Emma was not just speaking. She was engaging, connecting, trusting. The child psychologist fumbled for her notebook, her hands shaking as she tried to capture the behavioral changes she was witnessing. This wasn't just selective mutism resolving. This was a complete psychological resurrection happening in real time. "She's really talking," Dr. Chun whispered to herself, her voice filled with wonder. After 6 months of complete silence, she's really talking. The implications were staggering. Emma had not only found her voice again, but was demonstrating social engagement, emotional connection, and trust, all the things that trauma had stolen from her that terrible night in the closet. Jake Thompson stood motionless, watching his partner work magic he'd never imagined possible. Rex remained perfectly still as Emma continued to pet his fur and whisper praise, the German shepherd's tail wagging gently in response to her words. "Good boy, Rex, such a good boy," Emma repeated, her voice growing slightly stronger with each repetition, like a muscle being exercised after months of disuse. The hardened police officer felt his throat constrict with emotion as he remembered finding Emma that night silent, terrified, broken. Now she was choosing to trust again, and somehow his four-legged partner had become the key to unlocking her healing. Every skeptical thought he'd harbored about the therapy dog program dissolved as he witnessed the profound impact of Rex's gentle presence on this traumatized child. Bailiff Tom Rodriguez wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, no longer caring about maintaining professional stoicism. In 20 years of courthouse security, he'd become accustomed to the sound of crying, usually from grief, anger, or frustration. But Emma's soft voice praising Rex was the most beautiful sound he'd ever heard in this building. Even the other bailiffs stationed throughout the courtroom had tears in their eyes as they watched the miracle unfold. On the video monitor, Carmen Martinez pressed both hands against the glass partition of her rehabilitation facility's communication room, her face wet with tears as she watched her daughter speak for the first time in 6 months. The other residents and counselors had gathered behind her, drawn by her emotional outburst, and now they too were witnessing something extraordinary through the pixelated video feed. "That's my baby," Carmen whispered repeatedly, her voice breaking with each word. "That's my beautiful baby girl." The counselor beside her, Maria Gonzalez, had been working in addiction recovery for 15 years and had seen many family reunification moments, but nothing compared to watching a mother witness her daughter's voice return after months of silence. Even through the poor video quality, Emma's transformation was undeniable. Diego Martinez, appearing on his own video feed from county jail, sat in stunned silence as he watched his daughter interact with the police dog. For the first time in months, perhaps years, his face showed something other than anger or defiance. The reality of what his violence had cost his daughter's voice, her sense of safety, her ability to trust hit him with devastating clarity. His attorney noticed the change, watching as Diego's usual aggressive posturing crumbled into something that looked like genuine remorse. Judge Williams finally managed to compose herself enough to speak, though her voice still trembled with emotion. "This is extraordinary," she said, addressing the courtroom while never taking her eyes off Emma and Rex. "In 23 years on this bench, I have never witnessed anything like what we're seeing today." She paused to wipe her eyes with a tissue from the box she kept discreetly beside her gavel. "Emma, sweetheart, can you tell us anything else? Can you say your name?" Emma looked up from Rex for the first time since approaching him, her dark eyes finding Judge Williams' face. The intimidating figure in black robes, who had represented authority and judgment, suddenly seemed less frightening, more like a grandmother asking a simple question. "Emma," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the silent courtroom like a prayer being answered. "Emma Martinez." Rosa let out a cry of joy, so profound it seemed to come from her very soul. The sound of her granddaughter saying her own name after 6 months of silence was more precious than any blessing she'd ever received. She crossed herself repeatedly, whispering prayers of gratitude in Spanish between her tears. A prosecutor, David Harrison, who had been preparing arguments about the complexities of family reunification, found himself completely unprepared for this development. He'd entered the courtroom ready to discuss legal precedents and psychological evaluations. But how do you argue against a miracle? How do you question the healing power of love when you're watching it happen before your eyes? Even Emma's court-appointed advocate, Jennifer Walsh, who had remained professionally composed through months of hearings, found herself crying openly. She'd fought for countless children over her 10-year career, but she'd never seen such a dramatic breakthrough. Emma was not just speaking. She was engaging with the world again, trusting again, healing in real time. Rex seemed to understand the magnitude of what was happening. The German shepherd remained calm and patient as Emma continued to pet him and whisper words of praise. his presence providing the safe harbor she needed to venture back into verbal communication. His tail wagged gently, not with the excitement he might show during play, but with the satisfied contentment of a job well done, a soul saved through simple, unconditional love. As the afternoon light continued to stream through the courtroom, windows, bathing Emma and Rex in an almost celestial glow, everyone present understood they had witnessed something that would change their lives forever. This wasn't just about custody arrangements or legal proceedings anymore. This was about the mysterious ways healing finds us when we need it most, about the power of love to restore what trauma has stolen, and about a little girl who had found her voice again through the gentle heart of a dog who somehow knew exactly what she needed. 6 months after that miraculous day in courtroom 3B, Emma Martinez burst through the back door of her grandmother, Rosa's modest duplex, her laughter echoing across the small backyard, where morning sunlight painted everything in shades of gold and possibility. At her heels ran Hope, a golden retriever puppy whose boundless energy perfectly matched Emma's newfound zest for life. The transformation was so complete, so joyful, that neighbors often stopped their morning routines just to watch the little girl play. The same child who had once sat in terrified silence now filled the world with her bright chatter and infectious giggles. "Mas despacio, mi amor," Rosa called from the kitchen window, her voice carrying both affection and gentle concern as she watched her granddaughter race around the yard. At 63, Rosa had never imagined she'd be chasing after both 4-year-old child and an energetic puppy, but the exhaustion was sweet. A small price to pay for Emma's complete recovery and the family they'd rebuilt together from the ashes of trauma. Inside the house, the refrigerator door served as a gallery of Emma's artistic explosion, dozens of colorful drawings depicting her favorite subjects, dogs of every size and breed, police officers with kind faces, and courtrooms filled with rainbows and smiling people. Judge Patricia Williams kept her favorite drawing framed on her desk at the courthouse, a stick-figure child holding hands with a large dog, while a woman in black robes smiled down at them from her bench, hearts floating everywhere like confetti, celebrating love's victory over fear. The Denver Family Court had become a model for courthouse therapy programs across the nation, following the media attention from Emma's breakthrough. The story had been featured on national news, inspiring legislation in 12 states to fund similar programs. Judge Williams found herself traveling frequently to speak at conferences, sharing Emma's story and advocating for the healing power of therapy animals in traumatic legal proceedings. Every child deserves to feel safe when we make decisions about their future, Judge Williams would tell her audiences, her voice still catching with emotion months later. Sometimes that safety comes from the most unexpected sources, like a German shepherd named Rex, who understood what we adults had missed, that healing begins with trust, and trust begins with feeling truly safe. Officer Jake Thompson had embraced his role as a therapy dog handler with an enthusiasm that surprised everyone, especially himself. The tough narcotics cop who had once resisted touchy-feely assignments now volunteered for extra courthouse shifts and had completed advanced training in animal-assisted therapy. Rex, meanwhile, had become something of a celebrity, recognized everywhere they went by families whose lives had been touched by his gentle presence during their most difficult moments. Their monthly visits to Emma had become a cherished tradition. Every third Saturday, Jake and Rex would drive to Rosa's neighborhood, where Emma would be waiting on the front porch, practically vibrating with excitement. "Rex is here! Rex is here!" she would shout, running to greet her four-legged hero with hugs and praise that never failed to make Rex's tail wag with pride. Dr. Sarah Chon had documented Emma's recovery as one of the most remarkable cases of trauma resolution in pediatric psychology literature. Emma now spoke in complete sentences, engaged actively with other children, and showed no signs of the selective mutism that had once threatened to steal her voice forever. More importantly, she had developed healthy coping mechanisms and a support network that would serve her well throughout her life. The key was Rex, Dr. Chun explained in her published case study. He provided what we call co-regulation. His calm presence helped Emma's nervous system settle enough for her to access language and social connection again. But it was more than clinical intervention. It was love in its purest form, offered without conditions or expectations. Carmen Martinez had completed her rehabilitation program and now lived in a transitional housing facility across town, where she worked as a peer counselor, helping other mothers struggling with addiction. Her supervised visits with Emma had gradually increased to overnight stays, and Judge Williams was considering a recommendation for partial custody pending Carmen's continued sobriety and employment stability. "Mia, tell me about school today," Carmen would say during their Wednesday evening visits, treasuring every word that flowed from her daughter's lips like liquid gold. Emma would chatter endlessly about her preschool adventures, her teachers, her friends, and always inevitably about Hope and Rex and all the dogs she planned to help when she grew up. "I want to be a dog doctor," Emma had announced recently, "so I can make all the dogs feel better like Rex made me feel better." Diego Martinez had been sentenced to 18 months in county jail, followed by mandatory anger management and substance abuse treatment. His letters to Emma, supervised and infrequent, showed signs of genuine remorse and a desire to rebuild the relationship he had destroyed. Judge Williams had not yet ruled on his petition for eventual supervised visitation rights, but his consistent participation in jail programs and counseling suggested the possibility of redemption, however distant. The story had touched hearts far beyond Denver's city limits. Rex and Jake received letters from across the country from other trauma victims, from families facing custody battles, from children who had been inspired by Emma's courage to find their own voices. A children's book publisher had approached them about sharing Emma's story, with proceeds going to fund therapy dog programs in family courts nationwide. Rosa kept the framed newspaper clipping on her mantel. "Judge in tears after 3-year-old girl speaks 2 words to police dog." A headline had captured international attention, but Rosa preferred the photo beneath it, Emma kneeling beside Rex in the courtroom, her face glowing with joy and trust, surrounded by adults whose tears bore witness to the miracle they had witnessed. On quiet evenings, after Emma had been tucked into bed with stories and songs and prayers of gratitude, Rosa would sit on her back porch and watch Hope chasing fireflies in the gathering dusk. She would think about that terrible night 6 months ago when Emma had hidden in the closet, and then about the moment when her granddaughter's voice returned through the love of a dog named Rex. Sometimes miracles come disguised as ordinary things, as a grandmother's fierce love, as a judge's unprecedented decision, as a reluctant police officer and his 4-legged partner who discovered that healing others could heal themselves. Sometimes the most profound words are the simplest. One's good boy. Sometimes the most powerful transformations begin with the smallest acts of trust. Emma Martinez had found her voice again, but in doing so, she had helped an entire community remember that love, in all its forms, remains the most powerful force for healing in a world that too often forgets the magic that happens when we choose to care for one another. In her bedroom, surrounded by stuffed animals and drawings of dogs, Emma slept peacefully, dreaming of golden retrievers and German shepherds, of courtrooms filled with kindness, and of all the children she would someday help find their voices, just as Rex had helped her find hers.